In the heart of Chicago's West Side stands a nondescript building, once a bustling warehouse. This structure, however, has garnered infamy not for its commercial past but for its role as the Chicago Police Department's Homan Square facility. Beyond its official function of housing the evidence and recovered property section, Homan Square has been shrouded in controversy, drawing parallels to clandestine interrogation sites. In February 2015, investigative journalists began shedding light on the alleged activities within Homan Square. Reports described it as an off-the-books interrogation compound where individuals, primarily from Chicago's poor black and brown communities, were detained without official records, effectively rendering them invisible to family and legal representatives. Detainees recounted harrowing experiences of being shackled for extended periods, denied access to legal counsel, and subjected to physical and psychological abuse. One such individual, a protester arrested during the 2012 NATO summit, detailed being handcuffed to a bench for nearly 17 hours without charge or access to an attorney. The case of the NATO 3 further spotlighted Homan Square's operations. In 2012, 3 activists were arrested under suspicion of terrorism during the NATO summit. They were held at Homan Square, with their attorneys unaware of their whereabouts for hours. This incident underscored concerns about due process violations and the potential for abuse within such secretive facilities. The Chicago Police Department responded to these allegations by asserting that all detainees at Homan Square had access to legal representation and that standard booking procedures were followed. However, numerous defense attorneys and civil rights advocates challenged these claims, citing systemic issues within the police department regarding detainee treatment and transparency. The revelations about Homan Square drew parallels to secret government detention facilities, places used to detain and interrogate individuals outside the bounds of international law. Following the September 11th attacks, similar sites were established in various locations worldwide, where detainees were often subjected to harsh interrogation methods. One notorious detention site was located in Afghanistan. This former brick factory was repurposed into a detention center where detainees endured severe mistreatment. In one well-documented case, an Afghan detainee died from hypothermia after being subjected to harsh conditions, highlighting the extreme measures employed within such facilities. The existence of these sites was officially acknowledged years later, following investigative reports and mounting pressure from human rights organizations. Courts later confirmed that certain countries had hosted these detention centers where detainees were subjected to torture. The parallels between Homan Square and these secret detention sites raised profound questions about domestic law enforcement practices and the potential erosion of constitutional rights. While black sites operated under the guise of national security on foreign soil, Homan Square functioned within the United States, targeting American citizens. This blurring of lines between military tactics and civilian policing has sparked debates about accountability and oversight. Civil liberties organizations have condemned the practices alleged at Homan Square. They argue that such secretive detention undermines the foundational principles of due process and equal protection under the law. The lack of transparency and accountability in these operations poses significant threats to democratic governance. In response to public outcry, protests erupted in Chicago demanding the closure of Homan Square and a comprehensive investigation into its operations. Activists highlighted the facility as emblematic of broader systemic issues within the police department, including racial profiling, excessive use of force, and a pervasive lack of accountability. The Chicago Police Department maintained that Homan Square was not a secret facility and that its operations were in line with standard police procedures. They emphasized that the facility was accessible to the public for property retrieval and that detainees' rights were upheld. However, conflicting accounts from former detainees and legal professionals have fueled ongoing skepticism and demands for independent investigations. The controversy surrounding Homan Square is not an isolated incident but part of a broader pattern of secretive detention practices within the United States. For instance, in the aftermath of 9/11, reports emerged about the use of naval vessels as floating prisons where detainees were held incommunicado away from legal oversight. Moreover, historical government programs involving mind control experiments further exemplify the lengths to which agencies have gone in the name of national security. These experiments, conducted during the Cold War era, involved administering drugs to unwitting subjects to explore mind control techniques, leading to severe psychological and physical harm. The legacy of such clandestine operations has left an indelible mark on public trust in government institutions. Revelations about these programs have fueled conspiracy theories and deepened skepticism about the true extent of government surveillance and control over citizens. In recent years, there has been a growing movement advocating for greater transparency and accountability in law enforcement and intelligence operations. Legislative efforts have been made to curtail the use of secretive detention practices and to ensure that individuals' constitutional rights are protected, even in matters of national security. The debate over facilities like Home and Square underscores the delicate balance between ensuring public safety and safeguarding individual liberties. While law enforcement agencies argue that such measures are necessary to combat crime and terrorism, critics warn that unchecked power can lead to widespread abuse. Reports indicate that many detainees at Home and Square were young Black and Latino men, reinforcing concerns about racial disparities in policing. The lack of official booking records meant that families and attorneys were often unable to locate those taken to the facility, leaving them in a legal gray zone. One former detainee recalled being denied access to food, water, and the bathroom for hours while handcuffed to a bench. Others described intense interrogations where officers used intimidation tactics to extract information, sometimes without even formally charging the individuals involved. Attorneys attempting to locate their clients faced immense difficulties. Many reported that officers at nearby police stations would deny any knowledge of detainees' whereabouts, leaving families in distress and legal representation nearly impossible. While some officials dismissed the allegations as exaggerated, independent investigations suggested otherwise. Journalists and human rights organizations uncovered patterns of unofficial detention, raising serious ethical and legal concerns about law enforcement's adherence to due process. The secrecy surrounding Home and Square contrasts sharply with the public accountability expected of police departments. Unlike traditional precincts where detainees are booked and recorded, this facility operated in a manner that allowed individuals to be detained without leaving a paper trail. Critics argue that such practices erode trust between communities and law enforcement. When individuals disappear into untraceable facilities, the legal system itself is undermined, creating an environment where abuse can flourish unchecked. The broader implications of Home and Square extend beyond Chicago. If such a facility can operate within a major U.S. city, it raises questions about similar operations elsewhere in the country. Many wonder whether other law enforcement agencies employ similar tactics in secretive locations. Government agencies have a long history of controversial detention programs. From internment camps during World War II to covert operations during the Cold War, history is rife with examples of civil liberties being sacrificed in the name of national security. The public response to Home and Square has been mixed. While some view it as a necessary tool for combating crime, others see it as a clear violation of constitutional rights. The debate continues as activists push for greater transparency and oversight. Chicago has long struggled with issues of police misconduct. From the infamous torture cases linked to former police commander John Burge to widespread corruption scandals, the city's law enforcement history is fraught with controversy. Calls for police reform have intensified in recent years. Activists and civil rights groups demand increased accountability, including civilian oversight of detention facilities and mandatory body cameras for officers involved in interrogations. Legal experts argue that secretive detention sites like Home and Square violate fundamental constitutional protections. The right to legal representation and protection against unlawful detention are cornerstones of the justice system, yet reports suggest these rights were routinely ignored at the facility. Despite growing awareness, many aspects of Home and Square's operations remain unknown. The facility continues to function, and while authorities insist that detainees are treated fairly, skepticism remains high among activists and legal professionals. As investigations continue, the legacy of Home and Square serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power. Whether the facility will eventually face deeper scrutiny or continue its operations largely in the shadows remains an open question. The lack of definitive action against Home and Square underscores a broader issue in American law enforcement, one where accountability often lags behind exposure. While investigative reports and public outcry have brought attention to the facility, concrete reforms remain elusive. Lawmakers and city officials have largely sidestepped the controversy, leaving many to question whether justice will ever be served for those who suffered within its walls. For the families of detainees who vanished into the facility without a trace, the absence of accountability is particularly painful. Many were forced to endure days of uncertainty, searching for their loved ones while police denied any knowledge of their whereabouts. This sense of helplessness continues to fuel mistrust in law enforcement, particularly within marginalized communities that have long borne the brunt of aggressive policing tactics. Some activists argue that Homan Square is merely the tip of the iceberg. If a facility like this could operate in a major city with minimal oversight, what other secret detention sites might exist across the country? The fear is that similar black sites are scattered throughout urban areas, hidden in plain sight, allowing authorities to detain and interrogate individuals outside the normal constraints of the justice system. The legal battle over Homan Square has also highlighted significant flaws in the existing mechanisms for police oversight. Civil rights attorneys have faced immense hurdles in holding the Chicago Police Department accountable, as courts and government agencies often defer to law enforcement's claims of operational necessity. Without substantial legislative reform, experts warn that such facilities could persist indefinitely. Despite the lack of immediate action, the revelations surrounding Homan Square have prompted wider discussions on police reform. Advocacy groups have used the controversy to push for stronger legal protections for detainees, mandatory tracking of all arrestees, and greater civilian oversight of police operations. While these efforts have faced resistance from law enforcement unions, they represent a crucial step toward preventing future abuses. The role of media in uncovering Homan Square's existence cannot be overstated. Without investigative journalism, the facility may have continued to operate in complete secrecy. This has reinforced the importance of a free press in exposing government misconduct, even as authorities seek to downplay or discredit such reports. As public awareness of Homan Square grows, so does the demand for an independent investigation. Calls for a federal inquiry have been met with bureaucratic stalling, but activists remain determined to pressure lawmakers into action. They argue that without accountability, law enforcement agencies will only become more emboldened to use similar tactics in the future. The psychological impact of being detained at a site like Homan Square is profound. Many former detainees have reported lasting trauma, including anxiety, paranoia, and a deep-seated fear of law enforcement. These experiences, combined with the already hostile relationship between police and marginalized communities, further erode trust in the institutions meant to serve and protect. With each passing year, the likelihood of justice for Homan Square's victims grows slimmer. As attention shifts to new controversies and political crises, the risk of this dark chapter being forgotten increases. However, those who have suffered within its walls and the activists who fight on their behalf refuse to let the issue fade into obscurity. The true extent of what happened inside Homan Square may never be fully uncovered, but its legacy serves as a warning of what happens when power operates without oversight. Whether the facility continues its operations or eventually faces a reckoning, one thing remains clear: the fight for justice and transparency is far from over. For now, the fight for justice and transparency persists, with those affected by secretive detention sites calling for systemic change. Their stories serve as a chilling testament to what can happen when law enforcement operates beyond public scrutiny.